My stepdaughters demanded I leave the house the moment their mother was buried. They said, "Sign over the business, sign over the accounts, and get out of our lives. You were only married to her for 4 years. You are nobody." My lawyer begged me to fight them in court to drag it out to expose their cruelty. But I looked at her and said, "No. Let them have it. Let them have it all." So at the meeting, I signed every single document they put in front of me. I gave them the house. I gave them the cars. I gave them my life's work. They were smiling, clinking champagne glasses, celebrating their victory over the old man. They were laughing right up until their high-priced lawyer turned pale, dropped the contract, and whispered, "Oh my God." He had just read the one sentence that turned their victory into a $6 million nightmare. Before I tell you how I legally destroyed the people who tried to ruin me, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who mistook your kindness for weakness. My name is Tom Bennett. I am 72 years old. Most people look at me and see a tired old man in a flannel shirt and work boots. They see the calluses on my hands, the sawdust that seems permanently etched into my skin, and they assume I am just a simple carpenter. They assume I am slow. They assume I am weak. That was the mistake my late wife's daughters made. They forgot that you do not build a premier restoration empire in Seattle by being soft. You do it by knowing exactly how to spot rot before it brings the whole house down. It started at the funeral. It was raining, of course. A cold, relentless Seattle drizzle that soaked through your coat and settled in your bones. I was standing by the open grave, staring at the mahogany casket I had built for Catherine with my own hands. I had spent 3 days and nights in my workshop, sanding the wood, until it felt like silk weeping over every grain. It was the last thing I could ever do for the woman who had given me the happiest 4 years of my life. I stepped forward to throw the first handful of dirt. It is a tradition, a final goodbye. But before my hand could even open, I felt a sharp shove against my shoulder. I stumbled, my boots slipping in the mud. I looked up to see Rachel standing there. She is Catherine's oldest daughter, 38 years old, a real estate agent who measures people by their credit score. Her eyes were dry. Her makeup was perfect. There was no grief in her face, only cold, hard calculation. "Stop acting, Tom," she hissed, her voice low enough that the priest could not hear, but loud enough to cut through me. "Your time is up. Mom is gone. You do not belong here anymore. Get back to the cheap seats." I stood there, the wet dirt still clutched in my hand. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that I had paid $40,000 for this funeral. I wanted to tell her that while she was busy checking her phone during her mother's chemotherapy, I was the one holding Catherine's hand, cleaning up her vomit, and reading to her until she fell asleep. But I didn't. I respected Catherine too much to cause a scene at her burial. I simply dropped the dirt, turned around, and walked away. I headed toward the parking lot, just wanting to get into my truck and drive. I needed the silence of the cab. I needed to smell the old leather and diesel fuel. That truck is a 1998 Ford F-150. It has 300,000 miles on it. It is not pretty. The paint is fading and the bumper is dented. But that truck helped me build Bennett Restoration from a garage hobby into the most respected woodworking firm in the state. As I got closer, I stopped. My chest tightened. The truck was leaning to the left. Both tires on the driver's side were slashed, deep, jagged cuts. The rubber was shredded. I stood there in the rain, staring at the vandalism. It was petty. It was childish. And I knew exactly who had done it. Oh no, poor Tom. I turned around. Brittany was standing under a large black umbrella, holding her phone up. She is the younger sister, 34 years old. She calls herself an influencer, which mostly seems to involve spending money she does not have and complaining about how hard her life is. She was live streaming. I could see the little red recording dot. She was making a pouty face at the camera, pretending to cry. Guys, this is so sad, she said to her phone, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. My poor stepdad's truck is broken. Today of all days. Send thoughts and prayers. Then she lowered the phone, ended the stream, and her face changed instantly. The sadness vanished, replaced by a smirk that made my stomach turn. She reached into her designer coat and pulled out a wet, crumpled envelope. She shoved it into my chest. Here, she said, since you are stuck here anyway. What is this? I asked, my voice raspy. It is a notice, she said, checking her nails. Mom left the house to us. The deed was in her name, remember? You were just the husband. We checked with the lawyer. Since you are not on the title, you are technically a guest, and guests can be asked to leave. You have 24 hours to get your junk out of our house. I looked at the envelope, then at her. I paid the mortgage on that house for 15 years, I said quietly. I renovated every room. I built the deck where you smoke your cigarettes. I put the roof over your head when your biological father ran off with his secretary. Brittany laughed. It was a cruel, sharp sound. Should have put a ring on the house, not just the finger, Tom. Law is law. You have 24 hours, but honestly, I would hurry if I were you. Rachel is already looking at listings for dumpster rentals. She turned on her heel and walked back toward the limousines, stepping carefully over the puddles. I was left alone in the rain, with a flat tire and an eviction notice. I looked at my truck. I could not drive it. I could not call a tow truck, not today. I just wanted to go home. I wanted to sit in my chair, look at the fire, and mourn my wife. So I walked. It was 5 miles from the cemetery to the house in Capitol Hill. 5 miles in a downpour. I am 72 years old. My knees ache when the weather turns cold. My heart condition requires medication that I had left on the kitchen counter. But I walked. I walked past the coffee shops where Catherine and I used to have Sunday brunch. I walked past the park where we walked the dog. Every step was a reminder of what I had lost, and every step fueled a small, hot ember of rage deep in my gut. By the time I reached the house, it was dark. I was shivering uncontrollably. My flannel shirt was heavy with water clinging to my skin. My boots were caked with mud. I walked up the driveway, the same driveway I had paved myself 10 years ago. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my keys. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely find the keyhole. I finally slid the key in. It stopped halfway. I frowned and pushed harder. It wouldn't go in. I pulled it out and tried again. Nothing. I stepped back and looked at the door. The wood was scratched around the lock. The brass was shiny and new. They hadn't waited 24 hours. They hadn't even waited for the body to be cold. They had changed the locks while I was at the funeral. I pounded on the door. My fist thudded against the solid oak. Rachel, Brittany, open this door. I need my medicine. The house was dark, but I saw a curtain twitch in the living room window. I saw a shadow move. They were in there. They were watching me. They were probably laughing. I pounded again, harder this time. Open the door. Suddenly a voice came from the Ring doorbell camera speaker. It was Greg, Rachel's fiancé. A slick Wall Street wannabe who had never worked a day of manual labor in his life. Go away! Thomas. His voice crackled through the speaker. You are trespassing. Trespassing, I yelled at the plastic camera. I live here. My heart medication is on the counter. Let me in. The speaker crackled again. Not anymore. We called the cops, old man. They are on their way. If I were you, I would start walking. You don't want to spend the night in a cell at your age. The little blue light on the camera blinked off. I stood on the porch of the home I had built, the rain dripping off the brim of my hat. My chest was tight, a squeezing pain that I knew wasn't just grief. I had no car. I had no home. I had no medicine. and I could hear the distant siren of a police car getting closer. I looked at the heavy oak door one last time. I had carved that door. I had selected the wood. I had installed the hinges. I turned around and walked back out into the rain. They thought they had won. They thought they had crushed me. They thought I was just a sad old man who would fade away into the night. But as I walked toward the bus stop, clutching my chest, I wasn't thinking about where I would sleep. I was thinking about the safe in my workshop. I was thinking about the documents inside that neither Rachel, nor Brittany, nor their smart-mouthed fiancé knew existed. They wanted a war. They had no idea they had just declared it on a man who had nothing left to lose. De la fun noi dung tip teo cha fun kan hai duk viet noi tip mat trien dam bao van fung tu su jiao kam suk va tun tien voizong duk AI voice over. The rain was not stopping. If anything, it was coming down harder, turning the driveway into a river of mud and oil. I stood there pounding on the solid oak door until my knuckles were raw and bleeding. The pain in my hand was nothing compared to the crushing pressure in my chest. It felt like an invisible hand was squeezing my heart, tightening its grip with every beat. My medication was sitting right there on the kitchen island next to the fruit bowl, just 10 feet away. But that door might as well have been a steel wall. "Open the damn door!" I screamed, my voice cracking. "I need my pills. Please, just give me my pills." I waited for a sound for a lock to turn. Instead, I heard the wail of a siren cutting through the storm. Blue and red lights flashed against the wet siding of the house, illuminating the windows like a strobe light in a horror movie. 2 squad cars pulled up to the curb, screeching to a halt. The neighbors were already peeking through their blinds. Mrs. Higgins across the street, whom I had helped fix a leaky roof last winter, was watching. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to sink into the ground. A young officer stepped out of the first car, his hand resting instinctively on his holster. He could not have been more than 25. He looked at me, a soaking, wet old man, shaking violently on the porch, and then he looked at the house. "Sir, step away from the door," he shouted over the rain. "Keep your hands where I can see them." "I am not a criminal," I stammered, raising my trembling hands. "I live here. My wife just died. I just need my medicine." Before the officer could answer, the front door swung open. Greg stepped out onto the porch. He was wearing one of my cashmere sweaters, the one Catherine bought me for our last anniversary. He looked warm, dry, and completely at ease. He held a manila folder in his hand like a weapon. "Officer, thank God you are here," Greg said, his voice smooth and practiced. "This man is becoming violent. We have asked him to leave multiple times. He is terrifying my fiancée and her sister." "That is a lie," I yelled, stepping forward. The officer stepped between us, holding up a hand to my chest. "Back up, sir. Now." Greg handed the folder to the officer. "Here is the deed to the property, officer. As you can see, the sole owner was Catherine Bennett. Upon her death, the property transferred to her daughters Rachel and Brittany. This man has no legal claim to be here. He is trespassing." The officer shined his flashlight on the papers. The rain splattered against the documents, but the legal reality was clear. Catherine's name. Only Catherine's name. I had let her keep it that way because I wanted her to feel secure. I wanted her to know I wasn't after her assets. I never imagined that my act of love would become the weapon used to destroy me. The officer looked up at me, his expression softening just a fraction. "Sir, is your name on this deed?" "No," I whispered. "But I paid the mortgage. I built this porch." "The law is the law, sir," the officer said, closing the folder. "You have to leave the premises. If you refuse, I will have to arrest you for criminal trespassing." I looked at Greg. He was smirking. It was a subtle, cruel twist of his lips that only I could see. "My heart medication," I said, my voice barely audible. "It is inside. And my personal effects. My clothes." We will put everything in a box and leave it on the curb tomorrow, Greg said dismissively. Now get off our property. I felt a wave of dizziness. I took a step back, gripping the porch railing to steady myself. My hand ran over the smooth, cold wood of the column. It was genuine Honduran mahogany. I had hand-turned these columns myself on my lathe in the workshop. I remembered the smell of the sawdust, the way the wood revealed its grain as I sanded it for hours. These columns alone were worth more than the flashy sports car Greg had parked in the garage. They were art. They were history. And now I was being kicked off the very porch I had crafted by a man who wouldn't know the difference between mahogany and plywood. Wait, I said, stopping at the bottom of the steps. The officer tensed up. Sir, do not make this difficult. The dog, I said. Just give me Rusty. Greg raised an eyebrow. The dog, that mangy old thing, died 2 years ago. His ashes, I said, staring into Greg's eyes. The wooden box on the mantel. It has his collar and his ashes. He was my dog before I met Catherine. He is all I have left. Please, just give me the box. Greg sighed, acting as if I was asking for the moon. He turned back into the house. For a second, I thought he had a shred of humanity left. I thought maybe, just maybe, there was a heart beating under that stolen sweater. He came back out a moment later holding a small, polished cedar box. My heart leaped. He walked to the edge of the porch. I reached out my hands to take it. Oops, Greg said. He did not hand it to me. He dropped it. He dropped it right into a puddle of muddy water at the base of the stairs. Then, with a casual flick of his expensive loafer, he kicked the box. It skidded across the wet pavement, tumbling over and over until it hit the tire of the police car. The lid cracked open. Take your trash and get out of here, Greg said. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was quiet. It was the sound of a heavy load finally breaking the beam that held it. I looked at the box lying in the mud. I looked at the officer, who looked away in shame but did nothing. I looked at Greg standing high and mighty on the porch I built. I did not scream. I did not fight. I walked over to the police car, bent down, and picked up the cracked box. I wiped the mud off the cedar wood with my sleeve. I pressed it against my chest. I will go, I said. I turned my back on them. I walked down the driveway past the neighbors who were watching the old carpenter being evicted from his life. I walked all the way back to the main road, where I had left my truck with the slashed tires. I spent that night in the parking lot of a 24-hour Walmart. I managed to change the tires in the rain, my hands shaking so bad, I dropped the lug nuts into the puddles 3 times. I had no heat, because the truck's heater core had been busted for months. I curled up on the bench seat wrapped in a greasy canvas tarp I used for hauling lumber. The pain in my chest was a dull throb now, a constant reminder of my fragility. I stared at the ceiling of the truck cab, listening to the rhythm of the rain hitting the metal roof. I was cold. I was hungry. I was homeless. But as I lay there, clutching the cracked box of my dog's ashes, I realized something strange. The tears had stopped. The grief for Catherine was still there, but the pity for myself was gone. In its place was something cold and hard, like steel tempered in fire. They thought they had won because they had the house. They thought they had won because they had the deed. They thought the game was over. I closed my eyes and pictured the safe in my workshop. I pictured the stack of documents sitting there in the dark. Greg had called my life's work trash. He had kicked the only friend I had left into the mud. I am not going to just sue them, I whispered to the empty truck cab. I am going to bury them. I fell asleep with a grim smile on my face. Tomorrow I would not go to the bank. Tomorrow I would go to see Sarah, and we would start digging the graves. The morning sun hit the windshield of my truck, waking me up with a blinding glare that felt less like a new beginning and more like an interrogation lamp. My neck was stiff, locked in a painful knot from sleeping upright in the driver's seat. I rubbed my eyes, smelling the stale scent of old coffee and diesel fuel. I was 72 years old, a man who had employed hundreds of people, restored historic landmarks, and built a legacy with my bare hands. And here I was, waking up in a Walmart parking lot, like a fugitive brushing my teeth with a bottle of water and spitting out the window. I started the engine. It coughed and sputtered before roaring to life, a sound that usually comforted me but today just sounded tired. I needed to go to the one place where I still felt like a man. The one place where the laws of physics and craftsmanship still applied, where hard work actually meant something. Bennett Restoration. I drove toward the industrial district, the city waking up around me. My stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten since the funeral, but I ignored it. I needed to check on my shop. I needed to make sure my crew was okay. I needed to sit at my desk and figure out how to fight back against the two vultures who had stolen my home. But as I pulled into the gravel lot of the workshop, my heart sank. Right there in my reserved spot was a silver BMW convertible. It was parked diagonally, taking up 2 spaces, shining obnoxiously against the backdrop of my weathered brick building. It was Greg's car. I parked my truck next to a stack of drying cedar planks and walked toward the entrance. Usually the shop would be buzzing by now. I should be hearing the high-pitched whine of the table saws, the rhythmic thumping of the planers, and the banter of my guys. But today it was quiet. Too quiet. I pushed open the heavy steel door. The smell hit me first. Sawdust, linseed oil, and varnish. It was the perfume of my life. But the lights on the shop floor were off. My crew was nowhere to be seen. I walked straight to the glass-walled office at the back of the warehouse. It was raised up on a platform so I could always keep an eye on the work. As I climbed the stairs, I saw them. Greg was sitting in my chair. He had his feet up on my desk. His designer loafers were resting on a stack of blueprints I had been working on for the city library restoration project. And in his hand he was holding a mug. I stopped in the doorway, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't just any mug. It was a chipped, ugly ceramic thing Catherine had found in a pottery class 10 years ago. It said #1 Grump on it. I drank from that mug every single morning. It was sacred. And Greg was sipping a latte out of it, looking at his phone while Rachel stood behind him, looking at an architectural rendering on the wall. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," Greg said, not bothering to take his feet off my desk. "We were wondering if you had frozen to death in that truck." "Where is my crew?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. "We sent them home," Rachel said, turning around. She was wearing a white blazer that looked ridiculous in a dusty wood shop. "We are doing an audit, Tom. We can't have people making noise while we are trying to figure out just how deep in the hole you are." "In the hole," I repeated. "What are you talking about?" Greg swiveled my chair around. The leather squeaked. He dropped a stack of papers onto the desk right next to his shoes. "We have been looking at the books, Tom. This place is a disaster. You are bleeding money. The overhead is too high. The margins are too thin. You are paying these guys almost double the industry standard. It is unsustainable." I walked over to the desk. I looked at the papers. They were spreadsheets, but they were nonsense. They had projected costs that didn't exist and ignored the 3 pending contracts I had just secured worth over $500,000. "I pay for quality," I said. "That is why we are the best. That is why the city hires us." "You were the best in 1990, Greg said, taking a loud slurp from my wife's mug. "But this is the modern world. People want fast. They want cheap. They do not care if a joint is hand-dovetailed or glued together by a machine. You are a dinosaur, Tom, and dinosaurs go extinct." Rachel stepped forward, putting a hand on my shoulder. It felt cold, like a snake coiling around me. "Look, Tom, we are not heartless. We know this place means a lot to you. But you are 72. You are tired. You are sleeping in a truck, for God's sake. We want to help you. Help me, I asked. Like you helped me with the house. We have a plan, Greg said, finally taking his feet off the desk. He stood up and walked over to the window that overlooked the silent shop floor. Imagine this space, he said, sweeping his hand across the air. We got it. We sell all these old heavy machines for scrap. We sandblast the brick walls. We put in skylights, high-end industrial lofts. We call it the sawmill. It is gentrification gold, Tom. We can flip this building for 5 times what the business is worth. I felt a wave of nausea. They wanted to turn my cathedral of craftsmanship into condos for yuppies. They wanted to erase 50 years of sweat and skill and replace it with trendy coffee shops and drywall. And here is the best part, Rachel said, smiling that same fake smile she had at the funeral. If you sign over the business to us voluntarily, without a fight, we will cut you a check, $100,000. A golden handshake. You can go down to Florida, buy a little condo, and feed the pigeons. You will never have to worry about payroll or taxes again. $100,000. The inventory of rare mahogany in the back room alone was worth more than that. The tools were worth triple that. The brand name was priceless. They were trying to buy a diamond for the price of a piece of glass, and they were acting like they were doing me a favor. I looked down at the desk. It was a solid slab of black walnut I had harvested myself 40 years ago. I knew every knot, every grain pattern in that wood. I remembered the day I planed it flat. I remembered the day Catherine sat on the edge of it and told me she was pregnant, a pregnancy we sadly lost. This desk wasn't just furniture. It was a witness to my life. Greg and Rachel saw old wood. I saw a timeline. They were waiting for an answer. They expected me to yell. They expected me to fight, to throw a punch, to give them a reason to call the police again. But I remembered the safe. I remembered the documents. I remembered that to catch a wolf, you have to play the wounded lamb. I let my shoulders slump. I let my hand tremble as I reached out and touched the edge of the walnut desk. I forced myself to cough a dry, rattling sound that shook my whole body. I grabbed the back of a chair to steady myself, breathing heavily. I am so tired, I whispered, keeping my eyes down. Rachel and Greg exchanged a look. I could feel their excitement. I know, Tom, Rachel said, her voice dripping with condescension. It is too much for you. Just sign the papers. Let us take the burden. I looked up at them, making sure my eyes looked watery and defeated. I can't think straight right now, I wheezed. I didn't sleep. My heart. It is fluttering again. I need time. Just give me 24 hours. Please. Let me look at the papers. Let me say goodbye to the shop. Greg looked at his watch, pretending to be impatient, but I could see the victory in his eyes. Fine, he said. 24 hours. But tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., we meet at our lawyer's office and bring the keys. All of them. Thank you, I whispered. I turned around and shuffled toward the door, dragging my feet like a man half my age. I looked frail. I looked broken. As I stepped out of the office and onto the metal stairs, I paused. They thought I was out of earshot. I heard Greg chuckle. It was a low, nasty sound. Did you see his hands shaking? He whispered to Rachel. The old man is falling apart. He won't last another 6 months. We will save a fortune on that retirement payout if he kicks the bucket before we even have to cash the check. I did not turn around. I did not storm back in there and wipe that smile off his face. I gripped the cold steel railing of the stairs, my knuckles turning white. I walked down to the shop floor, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I wasn't shaking anymore. My heart wasn't fluttering. They wanted a dying old man. I would give them one. I would give them the performance of a lifetime. And while they were busy measuring my office for curtains, I would be sharpening the blade that would cut them off at the knees. I walked past the table, saw my hand brushing against the cast iron fence. Enjoy the coffee, Greg, I thought, because it is the last thing in this shop you will ever taste. I drove straight from the workshop to a brick building on the edge of downtown that looked like it had not been renovated since the Carter administration. This was the office of Sarah Jenkins. She has been my lawyer for 30 years. We have survived audits, lawsuits from angry subcontractors, and the mountain of paperwork that comes with running a business. Sarah is not like the lawyers Rachel and Greg hired. She does not wear Italian suits. She wears cardigans covered in cat hair, and she smokes slim cigarettes with the window cracked open. But she is the sharpest legal mind I have ever met. I walked in, and the bell above the door jingled. Sarah was behind her desk, buried under a mountain of files. She looked up, took one look at my face, and slammed a heavy binder shut. "You look like hell, Tom," she said, her voice raspy from years of tobacco. "They locked me out of the house, Sarah," I said, sinking into the leather chair opposite her. "They are taking the company. They offered me a settlement. $100,000. Sarah laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound. She reached into her drawer and pulled out a fresh pack of cigarettes. 100,000, she repeated. "That is an insult. That is not even the value of the raw lumber in your warehouse. You are not going to take it, are you?" I rubbed my face with my hands. I was so tired. The fight had drained out of me the moment Greg kicked my dog's ashes into the mud. "I do not have a choice, Sarah," I said quietly. "The house was in Catherine's name. The business assets are tied up in probate. They have a team of sharks. I just want to take the money, buy a trailer somewhere quiet, and wait to die. I am done fighting." Sarah stared at me for a long moment. Then she stood up, grabbed a stack of dusty files from the shelf behind her, and threw them onto the desk. Dust motes danced in the light of the desk lamp. "You are a coward, Tom Bennett," she said. I looked up, stung. She pointed a manicured finger at me. "I watched you build that company from a garage. I watched you work 18-hour days. I watched you pay for Catherine's treatments without complaining once. And now you are going to let two spoiled brats and a Wall Street fraud steal your legacy because you are tired." "It is not about being tired," I argued. "It is about the law. They have the leverage." "Leverage," Sarah scoffed. She opened the top file. It was yellowed with age. The label read, "Bennett Restoration Incorporation Documents, 1998. "Let us talk about leverage," she said. "Do you remember when we incorporated? Do you remember how we structured the initial capital?" I frowned, trying to remember. That was 25 years ago. I was focused on buying saws and hiring guys. I left the money stuff to the accountants. "I put everything I had into the company," I said. "My inheritance from my dad. My savings. About $200,000. "Exactly," Sarah said. "But you did not buy stock, Tom. We wanted to avoid the capital gains tax hit that year because the laws were changing. So we did something else." She flipped through the pages until she found a document with a blue signature at the bottom. My signature. "We set it up as a shareholder loan," she said. "You did not buy equity. You loaned the company $200,000 as startup capital. The company issued you a promissory note." I looked at the paper. I vaguely remembered it. It was just paperwork. It never mattered because I was the owner and the lender. It was money I owed myself. So what, I asked. "It is just a loan." Sarah pulled out a calculator. Her eyes were gleaming with a dangerous light. "Read paragraph 4, she said. I squinted at the small print. "The loan shall accrue interest at a rate of 8% per annum compounded annually until fully repaid. In the event of a change in control or ownership of the company, the full amount of principal and accrued interest becomes immediately due and payable." I looked up at Sarah. The numbers were swimming in my head. "The company never paid you back, did it?" Sarah asked. "No," I said. "I just kept reinvesting the profits. I never took the principal out." which means Sarah said, her fingers flying over the calculator keys, that for 25 years, that $200,000 has been sitting there growing. 8%. Compounded. Every single year. She hit the equal button and turned the calculator toward me. I looked at the number on the screen. $6,240,000. The room went silent. The only sound was the buzzing of the fluorescent light overhead. I stared at the number. 6.2 million. That was not just money. That was a nuclear warhead. Sarah leaned back in her chair and lit a cigarette. She blew a stream of smoke toward the ceiling. "Here's the beauty of it, Tom," she said. "This is a debt of the corporation. If they acquire the equity of the company, they acquire its liabilities. All of them. The moment they sign that paper to take ownership, they become responsible for paying off the company's debts, including this one. And if the company does not have the cash," I asked, my voice steady for the first time in 2 days. "Then you pierce the corporate veil," Sarah said with a wolfish grin. "Since they are the new owners, and if they drain the assets or act negligently, which we know they will, you can go after their personal assets to satisfy the judgment. Their houses, their cars, their trust funds, everything." I sat back in the chair. The shaking in my hands had stopped completely. The crushing weight on my chest vanished. I reached across the desk and took one of Sarah's cigarettes. I haven't smoked in 10 years, but today felt like a special occasion. I lit it, took a drag, and felt the smoke fill my lungs. So I said, exhaling slowly, "If I refuse to sign, they keep the company, and I get nothing. But if I sign, if I give them exactly what they want, then you trigger the bomb," Sarah finished. "They think they are inheriting a gold mine. They are actually inheriting a $6 million bill due in 48 hours. I looked at the calculator again. I thought about Greg's smirk. I thought about Brittany's live stream. I thought about Rachel telling me I belonged in the cheap seats. They wanted to buy me out for $100,000. They wanted to erase me. I picked up the phone on Sarah's desk. I dialed Rachel's number. It rang twice before she answered. "Hello," she said, sounding annoyed. "I am busy, Tom. Make it quick." I took a deep breath, pitching my voice to sound weak and broken. I channeled every ounce of the tired, defeated old man they thought I was. "Rachel," I said, "I am at my lawyer's office." And she asked, "Are you going to fight us? Because Greg is ready to file the lawsuit." "No," I said. "No fighting. I am too old for this, Rachel. You win. I will sign the papers. I will give you the company." There was a pause. I could hear her breathing change. I could practically hear her smiling. "That is a smart decision, Tom," she said, her voice suddenly sweet. "It is for the best." "Really, I will meet you tomorrow at 9, I said. "But Rachel, I have one condition," she sighed. "What is it now?" "More money." "No," I said. "The truck. The old Ford F-150. It is not worth anything, but it has sentimental value. Just let me keep the truck and my personal tools. You can have everything else. The accounts, the contracts, the building. Just leave me the truck." I waited. This was the test. If she was smart, she would wonder why I was settling for so little. But greed makes people blind, and arrogance makes them stupid. "Fine," she said, laughing. "Keep the junk. We were just going to scrap it anyway. See you at 9, Tom. Do not be late." She hung up. I put the phone down gently. I looked at Sarah. She was already drafting the demand letter that we would serve them exactly 1 minute after they signed the contract. I stood up and buttoned my coat. I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like a hunter who had just watched the prey step into the trap. "See you tomorrow, Sarah," I said. She nodded, smoke swirling around her head. "Give them hell, Tom." I walked out into the cool afternoon air. I had a date with destiny. And for the first time since Catherine died, I was looking forward to the future. I returned to the workshop later that afternoon. The sky had turned a bruised shade of purple, mirroring the way I felt inside. I parked my truck around the back out of sight and walked to the main entrance. I took a deep breath before opening the door, adjusting my posture. I slumped my shoulders forward. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I slowed my gait to a shuffle. If they wanted a defeated, senile old man, I would give them a performance worthy of an Academy Award. Inside, the silence of the shop had been replaced by the annoying buzz of pop music coming from a portable speaker. Brittany was there, of course. She had set up a ring light right in the middle of the assembly floor, the bright white circle reflecting off the polished concrete. She was holding up one of my antique hand planes, a tool that was over 100 years old and worth more than her handbag. "So guys," she chirped at her phone screen, doing a little dance. "We are clearing out all this dusty old junk to make room for the new vibe. Out with the old, in with the chic. Look at this rusty thing. Gross, right?" She tossed the hand plane into a cardboard box marked trash. The sound of the metal hitting the bottom of the box made my teeth ache. That plane had been a gift from my grandfather. It wasn't rusty. It was covered in a protective patina that took decades to form. I walked past her, keeping my head down. "Hey, careful," she snapped, not even looking at me. "You are ruining the lighting." "Sorry," I mumbled, coughing into my fist. Just getting my things." "Make it quick," she said, turning back to her camera. "Anyway, guys, like and subscribe for part 2 of the renovation tour." I made my way to my personal workbench in the corner. This was my sanctuary. It was where I did the detail work that machines couldn't touch. I pulled a battered cardboard box from under the bench and started filling it. I moved slowly, my hands trembling with a fake palsy. I picked up a set of old chisels. The handles were worn smooth by the sweat of my palms. To Brittany, they looked like garbage. To me, they were extensions of my fingers. I placed them in the box. I picked up a framed photo of Catherine and me at the company Christmas party 10 years ago. I wiped the dust off her smiling face and placed it gently on top of the chisels. Then I reached for the item that mattered most. It was sitting on the top shelf, disguised as a boring supply log. It was a thick, leather-bound notebook. The spine was cracked, and the pages were yellowed. This wasn't a supply log. This was the Black Book. Inside were the direct phone numbers of every major architect in Seattle. The private emails of billionaire collectors who only trusted Bennett Restoration with their antiques. The handshake deals, the secrets of the trade. This book was the brain of the company. Without it, the client list on the computer was just a list of names. This book held the relationships. I had prepared a duplicate the night before, an identical notebook filled with blank pages and a few random scribbles about buying sandpaper. I looked over my shoulder. Brittany was busy zooming in on a pile of sawdust for her video. With a sleight of hand I had learned from dodging bill collectors in the early days, I slipped the real notebook under my jacket and tucked it into the waistband of my pants. I replaced it with the dummy book on the shelf. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. One victory down. One to go. I shuffled over to the main saw. It was a massive German panel saw, an Altendorf F45. It was the heart of the shop. It cost $60,000. It was a precision instrument that could slice a sheet of plywood with the accuracy of a laser. Brittany and Greg saw a big table with a blade. They saw a machine. They didn't understand that a machine like this has a soul. I pretended to wipe down the surface with a rag, leaning heavily against the sliding carriage as if I needed the support. My hand slid underneath the control panel. There was a safety lockout pin located deep inside the mechanism. It was a feature designed for maintenance to mechanically freeze the blade height adjustment. If you didn't know it was there, you would think the motor was burnt out. You would press the start button and the screen would light up, but the blade wouldn't move an inch. I found the pin with my fingers. I pulled it. It came loose with a soft click that was drowned out by Brittany's music. I slipped the small metal pin into my pocket. Without that pin, this $60,000 masterpiece was just a 2,000-pound paperweight. They would call repair technicians. They would check the fuses. They would check the software. But they would never check the mechanical lockout, because you had to read the German manual to know it existed. And I knew for a fact neither Greg nor Rachel spoke a word of German. "Goodbye, old girl," I whispered to the saw. "Do not work for them." I picked up my cardboard box, clutching it to my chest like a shield. I turned to leave. "Well, look at this," a voice boomed from the office stairs. Greg was walking down looking fresh and crisp in a suit that cost more than my first car. He looked at the box in my arms. "Got your souvenirs?" "Tom, a few rusty nails, maybe some sawdust to remember us by." Just personal items," I stammered, looking at the floor. Greg walked up to me. He stood too close, invading my personal space. He smelled of expensive cologne and arrogance. He looked at the box, then he looked at the shop. "You know we are doing you a favor," he said, lowering his voice. "This place is a sinking ship. We are going to turn it around, sure, but it will take young blood. Vision. Things you lost 20 years ago." I nodded, swallowing the bile that rose in my throat. "You are right, Greg. I am past my prime." He smiled. It was a benevolent smile, the kind a king gives to a beggar. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather money clip. He peeled off a crisp $100 bill. "Here," he said, stuffing the bill into the breast pocket of my flannel shirt. "What? What is this?" I asked. "Cab fare," he said, patting my pocket. "Go get yourself a nice dinner. On me. And Tom, do not come back. Once we sign those papers tomorrow, this is private property. If I see you here again, I won't be as nice as the cops were last night." I looked at the $100 bill sticking out of my pocket. Benjamin Franklin stared back at me. It was the ultimate insult. He was treating me like a day laborer he had just fired. He was paying me to go away. A younger version of me would have punched him in the throat. The Tom Bennett who built this shop would have wrapped a crowbar around his knees. But the Tom Bennett standing there today had a bigger plan. I slowly raised my hand. I touched the bill. Then I looked Greg in the eye. I let a single tear leak out. "Thank you, Greg," I said, my voice cracking perfectly. "You are very generous." "Don't mention it," he said, turning away, already bored with me. "Just make sure the door closes behind you." I walked out of the shop. I walked past the silver BMW. I walked to my truck. I climbed into the cab and placed the box on the passenger seat. I pulled the safety pin out of my pocket and set it on the dashboard. I pulled the VIP notebook out of my jacket and placed it next to the pin. Then I pulled the $100 bill out of my pocket. I smoothed it out on the steering wheel. I wasn't going to spend it. I was going to frame it. I was going to hang it on the wall of my new office as a reminder. They thought they had bought my dignity for $100. They had no idea that they had just funded the down payment on their own destruction. I started the truck. The engine roared, sounding stronger than it had in days. "I am ready," I said to the empty cab. I drove away, leaving the shop in the hands of children playing with fire. Tomorrow they would strike the match, and I would be watching from the safety of the law, waiting for the explosion. That night, the hunger finally caught up with me. I had been running on adrenaline and caffeine for 2 days, fueled only by the burning need for justice. But as the sun went down and the cold Seattle drizzle turned into a steady downpour, my stomach started to cramp. I was sitting in the cab of my truck, parked on a side street near the waterfront, watching the city lights blur through the rain on the windshield. I checked my wallet. I had the $100 bill Greg had given me, but I refused to break it. That bill was a trophy. It was going on the wall. Aside from that, I had a few crumpled ones and a debit card connected to a joint account Catherine and I had shared for household expenses. It was the account I used to buy groceries, pay the electric bill, and buy Catherine her favorite flowers every Friday. I pulled into the parking lot of Sal's Deli. It was a small family-run place I had been going to for 20 years. Sal knew me. He knew my order. He knew Catherine. It felt like a safe place to get a warm sandwich and maybe a cup of coffee before another long, cold night in the truck. I walked in, the bell dinging softly. The smell of roasting pastrami and fresh bread hit me, making my mouth water instantly. Sal was behind the counter, wiping down the slicer. "Hey, Mr. Bennett," he called out, his smile warm and genuine. "I have not seen you in a week. I was so sorry to hear about Catherine. She was a saint." "Thank you, Sal," I said, my voice thick. It has been hard." "I bet," he said, shaking his head. "The usual pastrami on rye, extra mustard, and a black coffee, please," I said. I stood by the register watching him work. For a moment, things felt normal. I was just Tom Bennett, the carpenter, getting his dinner. I wasn't the homeless man sleeping in his truck. I wasn't the victim of a family conspiracy. I was just a regular guy. Sal wrapped the sandwich in white butcher paper and set it on the counter with a steaming cup of coffee. "That will be $12.50, Tom," he said. I reached for my wallet and pulled out the blue debit card. It was the card Catherine had given me years ago, saying, "What is mine is yours, Tom." I had deposited my paycheck into that account every month for 4 years. It was my money. It was our money. I swiped the card through the machine. "Please wait," the screen flashed. Then a harsh beep sounded. "Declined." I frowned. That was impossible. I knew there was over $5,000 in that account. I had checked the balance just last week before the funeral expenses hit. Even with the funeral costs, there should be plenty left. "Must be the chip," I said, forcing a laugh. "Machines these days, right?" Sal smiled, but I could see a flicker of concern in his eyes. "Try it again, Tom." "No worries." I swiped it again. Slower this time. Beep. Declined. "Please contact your financial institution." My heart started to hammer against my ribs. A line was forming behind me. A young couple in raincoats checking their watches. A delivery driver tapping his foot. I could feel their eyes on my back. The heat rose up my neck, burning my ears. "I do not understand." I stammered, my hands starting to shake. "There is money in there. I just used it the other day." Sal lowered his voice, leaning over the counter. "Tom, it is okay. You can pay me next time." "Really? Take the sandwich." "No," I said, my pride flaring up. "No charity, Sal. I pay my way." Just then my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A text message notification lit up the screen. It was from Rachel. I opened it, and the words hit me harder than a physical blow. "Deactivated the card, Dad. Stop spending our inheritance on sandwiches. We are freezing the assets until the signing. Time to learn some budgeting skills." I stared at the screen. She was watching me. She must have gotten an alert the second I tried to swipe the card. She wasn't just stealing the house and the business. She was tracking my every move, waiting for me to slip up, enjoying the spectacle of starving me out. She called me Dad only when she wanted to mock me. The humiliation was a cold, physical weight in my gut. I looked at Sal, who was trying to pretend he wasn't looking at the declined message. I looked at the people behind me who were shifting uncomfortably. "I am sorry," I whispered. I put the phone away and started digging through my pockets. I pulled out a handful of change. Quarters, dimes, nickels. I poured them onto the counter. I dug into my coat pocket and found 2 crumpled $1 bills. I counted it out, my rough, calloused fingers clumsy with shame. $4, $5, $6.50. I did not have enough. I looked at the sandwich. I could smell the mustard. I was so hungry it hurt. I pushed the coins toward Sal. "I will just take the coffee, Sal," I said, my voice barely steady. "I am not..." I am not as hungry as I thought. Sal looked at the pile of change, then at my face. He looked like he wanted to argue, wanted to just give me the food. But he knew me. He knew that if he gave me charity now, in front of these people, it would break whatever dignity I had left. "Okay, Tom," he said softly. "Just the coffee." He slid the cup toward me and pushed the sandwich aside. I took the cup. The heat seeped into my cold hands. I turned around and walked past the line of customers. I didn't make eye contact. I kept my head high, staring straight at the door. I walked out into the rain and climbed back into my truck. I sat there for a long time holding the coffee. I didn't drink it. I just stared at the text message from Rachel. Time to learn some budgeting skills. She thought this was a game. She thought she was teaching a dog to heel by tightening the leash. She thought that by taking away my sandwich, she was taking away my power. But she was wrong. She had just taken away the last shred of mercy I had for her. If she had left me this card, if she had let me have a hot meal maybe, just maybe I would have felt a twinge of guilt about what I was going to do to her tomorrow. Maybe I would have wondered if $6 million was too harsh a punishment. But now I felt nothing but cold, crystalline clarity. I took a sip of the coffee. It was bitter and black. It tasted like fuel. I pulled out my phone and dialed Sarah. She answered on the first ring. "Tom, everything okay?" "No, Sarah," I said. "Everything is perfect." I paused, watching a raindrop trace a path down the window, just like the path of their destruction would follow tomorrow. "I want you to add a clause to the closing documents," I said. "Tom, it is late," Sarah said, the sound of typing in the background. "We are printing the final drafts." "What is it? Do you want more time to move out?" "No," I said. "I want you to add a provision that the acquiring party, that is Rachel and Brittany, must cover all legal fees associated with the transfer of ownership, including my legal fees." Sarah paused. "Tom, your fees are only about $5,000. In the grand scheme of a $6 million debt, that is peanuts. Why bother?" "Because," I said, my voice dropping to a growl. "Today she denied me a $12 sandwich. She told me I needed to learn to budget. So tomorrow I want her to pay for the pen I used to sign her death warrant. I want her to pay for your time. I want her to pay for every single minute of this humiliation." I heard Sarah stop typing. Then I heard a low, dark chuckle. "You are a petty man, Tom Bennett," she said affectionately. "I learned from the best," I replied. "Just add it, Sarah, and make sure it is in bold." "Consider it done," she said. "Get some sleep, Tom. Tomorrow is a big day." I hung up. I finished my coffee in 2 large gulps. The hunger in my stomach was still there, but it had changed. It wasn't a hunger for food anymore. It was a hunger for the look on Rachel's face when the trap snapped shut. I started the truck. I had one more stop to make before tomorrow. I needed to wash my truck. I needed to shave. I needed to put on my best work boots. If I was going to attend my own execution, I was going to look like the man who built the gallows, not the man swinging from the rope. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor was silent and smooth, a glass cage shooting upward into the gray Seattle sky. I stood in the corner wearing my flannel shirt and my work boots, the leather still stained with the mud from the cemetery. Next to me, Sarah stood tall in her wool coat, clutching her briefcase. She did not say a word, but she gave my hand a quick, firm squeeze. It was the signal. The game was on. When the doors slid open, we were met by a receptionist who looked at me with thinly veiled disgust. She clearly thought I was there to fix a leaky faucet or empty the trash. I did not correct her. I just followed her down a hallway lined with modern art that cost more than my entire workshop, leading us to the main conference room. They were already there. The room was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city I had helped build. In the center was a massive table that looked like mahogany, but as I sat down, I ran my thumb along the underside of the edge. It was rough. It was particle board covered in a thin, expensive veneer. It was fake, just like the people sitting across from me. Rachel was checking her reflection in her phone screen, fixing a strand of hair. Brittany was slumped in her chair, typing furiously with her thumbs. Greg was leaning back, whispering something to their lawyer, David. David was exactly what I expected. He was a shark in a three-piece suit, with teeth that were too white, and a tan that did not come from the Seattle sun. He looked at me, took in my sawdust-covered clothes, and smirked. He saw a defeated old man. He saw an easy payday. "Let us get this over with," Rachel said without looking up. "I have a spa appointment at noon, and traffic is terrible." David cleared his throat and opened a thick leather binder. He slid a stack of documents across the table toward me. It was heavy, a tombstone of paper meant to bury my life. "Mr. Bennett," David began, his voice smooth and condescending. "Before you sign, I am required to summarize the key terms of the transfer. This is a total divestment agreement. Do you understand what that means?" I nodded slowly, keeping my eyes on the table. "It means I leave," I whispered. "It is more than that," David said, enjoying the sound of his own voice. Clause 1. You are transferring 100% of your equity in Bennett Restoration, including all physical assets, intellectual property, and client lists, to Rachel and Brittany. In exchange, you will receive a one-time settlement of $100,000. He paused, waiting for a reaction. I gave him none. Clause 5, he continued. The non-compete. You agree that for a period of 10 years, you will not engage in any carpentry restoration or construction business within the state of Washington. You will not contact any past or current clients. You will not step foot on any construction site. 10 years, I thought. I am 72. He is banning me from working until I am 82. He is telling me to go die. Clause 9. David said, his voice dropping an octave for emphasis. The name. You agree to permanently relinquish the rights to the name Bennett for any commercial purpose. The brand Bennett Restoration will belong solely to the new owners. You cannot use your own surname to conduct business ever again. I felt Sarah stiffen beside me. This was personal. Bennett was my father's name. It was the name on my birth certificate. It was the name I had carved into the beam of my first workshop. They were not just taking my money. They were stripping me of my identity. Is that necessary? I asked, my voice cracking. It is my name. It is a brand asset now, Greg interrupted, leaning forward. And we can't have you confusing the market with some cheap garage operation. The name belongs to us. I looked at Rachel. She was finally looking at me. There was no pity in her eyes. There was only impatience. Just sign it, Tom, she said. You do not need a business name. You are retired. Go feed the ducks. Stop making this difficult. David smiled, a cruel, tight expression. There is also a standard restraining order included in the final clause. You are not to come within 500 feet of the family home in Capitol Hill, nor the business premises starting immediately upon signature. If you need to retrieve any further personal items, you will have to hire a third-party mover at your own expense. He slid a black pen across the table. It spun on the polished surface and came to a stop right in front of my hands. So to summarize, David said, leaning back and tenting his fingers, we take the house, we take the business, we take the name. You take the check and disappear. Do we have an agreement? I sat there for a long moment. I listened to the hum of the air conditioning. I looked at the rain streaking the glass windows. I looked at Greg, who was already mentally spending the money he thought he was about to make. I looked at Brittany, who was suppressed a yawn. They had taken everything. My home, my dog's dignity, my wife's memory, and now my name. They thought they were stripping me naked, They didn't realize they were just cutting the cords that held back the avalanche. I looked at Sarah. She had her poker face on, but her eyes were burning. She knew exactly what was about to happen. She nodded a barely perceptible motion. I reached out with my right hand. I let it tremble. I let my fingers shake as they hovered over the pen. I wanted them to see the weakness. I wanted them to savor it. I picked up the pen. It felt heavy and cold. I just want this to be over, I wheezed. Then sign, Greg said, tapping the table. Right there, next to the X. I lowered the pen to the paper. The tip touched the signature line. The ink began to bleed into the fiber of the page, a tiny black dot that marked the end of an era and the beginning of a war. David watched me, his smirk widening into a grin of absolute triumph. He thought he was the smartest man in the room. He thought he had just skinned a sheep. I took a breath, steadied my hand for a split second, and began to write. The ink from the pen had formed a small black pool where I had let the tip rest against the paper. Everyone in the room was staring at that tiny dot. It was the only thing standing between them and the fortune they thought they were stealing. I could hear the rhythmic tapping of Rachel's fingernails on the glass surface of her phone. I could hear the heavy, impatient breathing of Greg across the table. They were so close to the finish line that they could taste the champagne. But I hesitated. I lifted the pen just a fraction of an inch off the paper. The room went deadly silent. Wait, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Greg let out a groan that sounded like a dying animal. He threw his hands up in the air, leaning back in his chair so violently that the leather creaked. Oh my God, Greg shouted, his face turning a blotchy shade of red. What is it now, Tom? What could you possibly want now? Do you want the stapler too? Do you want the paper clips? Just sign the damn thing. I did not look at him. I kept my eyes fixed on the signature line. I needed this to be crystal clear. I needed them to say it out loud on the record in front of witnesses. I just need to be sure, I said, keeping my tremor going, making my hand shake just enough to sell the act. You are taking everything right. Not just the assets. Not just the building and the tools. You are taking the full legal entity of Bennett Restoration. David. Their lawyer sighed and rubbed his temples. Yes, Mr. Bennett, David said, speaking to me like I was a slow child. As I explained 3 minutes ago, it is a stock purchase agreement. They are acquiring 100% of the company. That means they get the assets, the brand, the accounts, and yes, the obligations. It is a clean sweep. You walk away free and clear. I looked up then. I looked straight at Rachel. She had finally put her phone down, but she looked bored. She looked like she was waiting for a waiter to bring her the check, not waiting for her stepfather to sign away his life's work. And you are okay with that, Rachel? I asked. You understand what obligations means. You are ready to take responsibility for everything I built, the good and the bad. She rolled her eyes, a dramatic teenage roll that she had perfected when she was 16. Yes, Tom, she snapped. I know what an obligation is. I went to college. We want the company. We want the building. We want you out. Why do you have to make everything such a drama? Just sign the paper so I can go. I turned my gaze to Greg. And you, Greg, I asked. You are sure? You want the whole package? Greg slammed his open palm onto the table. The sound echoed through the large, empty conference room like a gunshot. Yes, he yelled, leaning over the table, his expensive tie dangling into his coffee cup. For the love of God, old man, yes, we take the assets, we take the liabilities, we take the sawdust and the cracks of the floor. We take it all. Now sign the paper before I lose my mind. That was it. That was the verbal confirmation. That was the nail in the coffin. I looked down at the paper one last time. I looked at the word grantor next to the blank line. I took a deep breath. and then I stopped shaking. The tremor in my hand vanished instantly. I gripped the pen not with the weak grip of a dying man, but with the firm, strong hand of a master carpenter. I pressed the tip of the pen into the paper. I did not write slowly. I wrote with force. I signed my name Thomas Bennett in large, sharp letters. I pressed down so hard on the final T that the metal tip of the pen tore right through the thick, expensive legal paper, scratching the veneer of the table underneath. It was a violent signature. It was an act of aggression. There, I said, my voice dropping an octave. It was no longer the raspy wheeze of a victim. It was deep, resonant, and cold. I slid the stack of papers across the table. David snatched them up immediately, as if he was afraid I would change my mind and try to eat them. He quickly flipped to the back page, checked the signature, and pulled out his notary stamp. Thump! He stamped the document. Thump! He stamped the copies. Congratulations, David said, closing the binder with a sense of finality. The transfer is complete. Bennett Restoration now belongs to Rachel and Brittany. He pushed a thin envelope toward me. There is your check, Mr. Bennett, David said dismissively. $100,000. Don't spend it all in one place. Now, if you would please vacate the premises, my clients have business to discuss. I looked at the check. I did not pick it up. Instead, I let out a long, slow exhale. I felt the tension leave my shoulders. The act was over. The mask could finally come off. I leaned back in the chair. I stretched my arms out, cracking my knuckles. I looked around the room, a small smile playing on my lips. Then I moved. I lifted my right leg, then my left. I swung my heavy mud-stained work boots up onto the polished conference table. I crossed my ankles, letting the dirty rubber soles rest right next to Greg's coffee cup. Thud. The sound was heavy and dull. A clump of dried mud fell off my heel and landed on the pristine legal binder. The room went silent. Greg stared at my boots. His eyes bulged. He looked like his brain couldn't process what was happening. The submissive, broken old man was gone. In his place sat a man who looked like he owned the building. What the hell do you think you are doing? Greg sputtered, his face turning purple. Get your dirty boots off my table. I locked my fingers behind my head and leaned back further, getting comfortable. Correction. Greg's, I said, my voice steady and commanding. It is your table now. You just bought it, along with everything else. Rachel looked at me, confusion clouding her face. Tom, what is wrong with you? Take the check and get out. You are embarrassing yourself. No, Rachel, I said, looking her dead in the eye. I am not going anywhere. Not yet. We have business to discuss. David stood up, adjusting his tie nervously. Mr. Bennett, the meeting is concluded. You have no further business here. If you do not leave, I will call security. I laughed. It was a loud, hearty laugh that filled the room. Sit down, David, I said, and keep your pen out. You are going to need it. I turned my head to Sarah. She had been sitting silently next to me the whole time, clutching her briefcase. She was smiling now, a sharp, predatory smile. Sarah, I said, why don't you show the new owners what they just bought? Sarah placed her briefcase on the table. The click of the latches sounded like the cocking of a gun. She opened it slowly. She did not take out a check. She did not take out a thank you note. She pulled out a single yellowed document preserved in a plastic sleeve. Rachel, Greg, Brittany. Sarah said, her voice crisp and professional. Since you were so eager to acquire all the obligations of the company, I assume you performed your due diligence regarding the shareholder loan agreement of 1998. Greg frowned. The what, he asked. Sarah slid the document across the table. It stopped right in front of David. David looked down. He read the title. He read the first paragraph. I watched the color drain from his face. It was beautiful. It started at his chin, and moved up to his forehead until he looked like a sheet of paper. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "What is it?" Rachel asked, panic rising in her voice. "David, what is it?" David looked up at me. His eyes were wide with horror. He looked at Sarah. Then he looked at the document again, his hands starting to shake. This says," he stammered. "Read it, David," I said, cutting him off. "Read Clause 4B. Out loud, so everyone can hear." David swallowed hard. He adjusted his glasses. In the event of a change in ownership, he read his voice trembling. The entirety of the principal loan, plus all accrued interest compounded annually, at 8% becomes immediately due and payable by the acquiring party. "And what is the total?" Sarah asked, pulling out a formal demand letter and slapping it onto the table. David looked at the demand letter. He choked. $6,240,000, he whispered. Silence. Absolute suffocating silence. Rachel dropped her phone. It hit the floor with a crack. Greg looked at me. He looked at my boots on the table. He looked at the check for $100,000 that he had just given me. $6 million, Greg whispered. I took my feet off the table and stood up. I leaned over, placing my hands flat on the mahogany veneer towering over them. "Congratulations to the new owners," I said, my voice cold as ice. "You wanted the company. You got it. Now about that debt. I accept wire transfers, cashier's checks, or—" I paused, looking Greg up and down. "I suppose I could take your assets, starting with that house you kicked me out of." "You think this is funny?" Greg said, his laugh sounding nervous and high-pitched in the sudden silence of the room. "You think you can just sit there with your muddy boots on my table and threaten us? We just bought you out, Tom. We own the company. We own the assets. We own you. You have nothing." He looked around the room for support, but nobody else was laughing. The air in the conference room had changed. It had gone from the sterile, cold atmosphere of a corporate transaction to the heavy, charged air of an execution chamber. And for the first time, Greg seemed to realize that the person in the chair wasn't the one with the hood over his head. Sarah did not say a word. She simply reached into her briefcase again. Her movements were slow and deliberate, like a magician preparing for the final prestige. She pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't crisp and white like the documents David had prepared. It was yellowed with age, the edges slightly frayed, protected inside a clear plastic sleeve. The typewriter font on it looked like something from a history museum. She slid it across the mahogany table. It spun slowly, passing Greg's coffee cup, passing Rachel's phone until it came to a stop, directly in front of David. David looked down at it. He adjusted his expensive rimless glasses. He looked bored, annoyed that we were wasting his billable hours. He picked up the document with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. "What is this?" David asked, scanning the header. "It is the original incorporation agreement from 1998, Sarah said, her voice cutting through the room like a razor blade. "Specifically, it is the shareholder loan agreement between Thomas Bennett and Bennett Restoration Incorporated." David froze. His eyes stopped moving. He went very still. I watched him read. I watched his eyes dart back and forth faster and faster. I saw a bead of sweat form at his temple and roll down his cheek, landing on his starch-white collar. He read the first paragraph, then the second. When he got to the 3rd paragraph, his hand started to shake. "Clause 4B, Sarah said softly. "Read it out loud, David." David swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed. He looked up at me, and the arrogance was gone. In its place was sheer, unadulterated terror. I do not think that is necessary," David stammered, trying to close the folder. "Read it," I commanded. My voice wasn't loud, but it slammed into him like a sledgehammer. David took a shaky breath. He looked at his clients, who were staring at him in confusion. In the event of a change in majority control or ownership, he read, his voice trembling, the entirety of the principal shareholder loan plus all accrued interest shall become immediately due and payable by the acquiring party. So what? Rachel interrupted, rolling her eyes. So we owe you the loan back. What was it? 200,000. We will write you a check. We have that in the operating account. God, you are so dramatic. Sarah smiled. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. It was $200,000 in 1998, Sarah said. But you forgot to ask about the interest rate. She pointed to the bottom of the page. 8%, Sarah said, compounded annually, for 25 years. She pulled a calculator out of her pocket and set it on the table. She punched in the numbers, the click of the keys echoing in the silence. $200,000, 8% interest, 25 years of compounding. She hit the equals button and turned the screen toward them. The number was glowing in black liquid crystal. $6,240,000. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a man. Greg stared at the calculator. His mouth fell open. He looked at the number, then he looked at me, then back at the number. He was trying to do the math in his head, trying to find a way for it to be wrong. But math does not lie. Compound interest is the most powerful force in the universe, and it had just landed on his head. That is impossible, Greg whispered. The company is not worth that much. Exactly, I said, leaning forward. The company is worth about $4 million, which means you are underwater, by over $2 million. The moment you signed that paper, the moment you acquired the obligations of the company, you became personally liable for a debt that exceeds the value of the asset you just stole. David dropped the paper. He looked like he was going to be sick. He turned to Rachel, his face twisting into a mask of fury. Why didn't you tell me? He screamed, losing all his professional composure. Why didn't you tell me there was an outstanding founder's loan? Rachel shrank back in her chair, looking from David to me. I didn't know, she stammered, her voice high and fearful. I thought he was just a carpenter. I thought he just built chairs. I didn't know he knew about finance. You thought I was stupid, I said. You looked at my dirty hands and my old truck, and you thought I was a simpleton you could roll over. You never bothered to check the books from the founding years. You were so busy looking at the profit margins from last month that you forgot to look at the foundation the house was built on. This is fraud, Greg shouted, standing up and pointing a shaking finger at me. You tricked us. You didn't disclose this. I laughed. I pointed to the stack of due diligence papers David had prepared. It is all in the public record, Greg. It is in the state filings. Your lawyer just didn't bother to look because he was too busy drafting the clause to ban me from using my own name. You were so focused on taking everything from me that you didn't check what you were actually taking. David sank into his chair, putting his head in his hands. He knew his career was over. He had just let his clients sign a death warrant because he had underestimated the opposition. So here is how this works, I said, standing up and walking around the table until I was standing right behind Rachel. I could smell her expensive perfume. It smelled like fear. You owe me $6.2 million, I said calmly. And per the agreement you just signed, that debt is due immediately upon transfer. Which was, I checked my watch 5 minutes ago. We do not have that kind of money, Rachel whispered, tears starting to well up in her eyes. The company accounts only have $300,000. I know, I said. And since the company cannot pay, and since you, the new owners, accepted full liability for all obligations, I guess I will have to look elsewhere for my money. I leaned down and whispered in her ear. I am going to pierce the corporate veil, Rachel. That is a legal term. Ask David what it means. It means I can come after your personal assets to satisfy the debt. I stood up and looked at Greg. I will take your condo in downtown, Greg. I checked the listing. It is worth about 1.5. That is a good start. I looked at Brittany, who had stopped texting and was staring at me with her mouth open. I will take your car, Brittany, and your collection of designer handbags, and your jewelry. Then I looked back at Rachel. She was clutching her purse, a $50,000 Hermes Birkin bag that she had bought the week after her mother got sick. I will take the house in Capitol Hill, Rachel, the one you kicked me out of. It will cover maybe a third of what you owe me. And that bag you are holding, that is mine too. Rachel clutched the bag to her chest, a sob escaping her throat. No, you can't. Mom left it to us. Mom left you a legacy, I said, my voice hard as stone. She left you a family. You threw it away because you wanted cash. Well, now you have a debt instead. I walked back to the head of the table. I picked up the check for $100,000 that David had given me. I looked at it for a moment, then I slowly tore it in half. I do not want your pocket change, I said, dropping the pieces on the table. I looked at the three of them, the arrogant, cruel people who had mocked me at a funeral, who had slashed my tires, who had tried to erase my existence. They were small now. They were terrified. You have 48 hours to wire the full amount to my account, I said. If the money is not there by 9 a.m. on Friday, Sarah will file the liens. We will freeze your bank accounts. We will seize your property. We will have the sheriff escort you out of my house the same way you had the police escort me off the porch. I signaled to Sarah. She snapped her briefcase shut. The sound echoed like a judge's gavel. We walked toward the door. I paused with my hand on the handle and looked back. Oh, and Rachel, I said. She looked up, mascara running down her cheeks. Don't bother trying to sell the furniture to raise the cash, I said. I built it. I know exactly what it is worth, and I will be watching. I opened the door and walked out. Behind me, the silence broke as Greg started screaming at David and Rachel started to scream at Greg. It was the sound of rats fighting on a sinking ship. I walked down the hallway, my work boots thudding softly on the carpet. I pressed the button for the elevator. I had walked in there a homeless old man. I was walking out to the owner of everything they held dear. 48 hours. I could not wait to see what they would try to sell first. The deadline came and went in silence. I sat in the cab of my truck, watching the digital clock on the dashboard flip from 8:59 to 9 o'clock. I refreshed my banking app one last time. The balance remained zero. There was no pending wire transfer. There was no last-minute miracle. They had called my bluff and they had lost. I put the phone down and picked up the radio. It is time, I said into the receiver. Let us go. I was not alone this time. Behind me, idling in the gray morning mist, was a convoy that would have terrified a drug lord. There were 2 sheriff's department cruisers with their lights flashing silently. There was a team of forensic accountants in a black sedan. There were 3 flatbed tow trucks. And there was a private security team Sarah had hired to ensure the asset recovery went smoothly. We rolled into the quiet, tree-lined streets of Capitol Hill like a funeral procession for their lifestyle. The neighbors came out onto their porches, coffee cups in hand. They had seen the police kick me out just a few days ago. Now they were going to see who really owned the neighborhood. I pulled my truck right up to the curb, blocking the driveway. The same driveway where I had walked in the rain. The same driveway where Greg had kicked my dog's ashes. I stepped out. The air was crisp. I adjusted my coat and walked toward the house, flanking the sheriff's deputies. One of the deputies, a large man named Miller, who I had done some cabinet work for years ago, nodded at me. Ready to take it back, Tom? He asked. I am just here to collect a debt, I said calmly. Miller walked up the steps and pounded on the heavy oak door. It was the sound of Judgment Day. It took a long time for the door to open. When it finally did, Rachel was standing there. She looked terrible. Her eyes were puffy and red. She was wearing a silk robe that looked slept in. She saw me. She saw the police. She saw the tow trucks lining the street. Tom, she whispered, her voice trembling. Please, we are trying to raise the money. We just need a few more days. Greg is calling investors. I looked at her. I did not feel pity. I felt the cold, hard precision of a carpenter measuring a cut. You had 48 hours, Rachel, I said. That was the contract. Deputy Miller stepped forward. Ma'am, I have a court order here for the immediate seizure of assets to satisfy a judgment in the amount of $6.2 million against Bennett Restoration and its guarantors. We are here to secure the property. Rachel grabbed the doorframe. You can't come in. This is my house. Actually, I said, stepping up to the porch, it is collateral. And since you used company funds to pay the property taxes last year, Sarah found a lovely little legal thread that ties this house directly to the business assets. Miller signaled his team. 2 deputies moved past Rachel, entering the foyer. I followed them. The house smelled of stale champagne and panic. Boxes were piled up in the hallway. They had been trying to pack. They had been trying to hide things. I walked into the living room. Brittany was there. She was sitting on the white sofa, surrounded by ring lights and tripods. She was holding her phone up, talking rapidly into the camera, tears streaming down her perfectly contoured face. They are literally breaking in right now, guys, she was sobbing to her followers. My evil stepfather is bringing the police to harass us. This is so unsafe. Please donate to the GoFundMe link in my bio so we can get a lawyer. She saw me and screamed, Get away from me, you are not allowed to be here. A repo agent, a stern woman with a clipboard, walked right up to Brittany. Ma'am, is that an iPhone 15 Pro Max? The agent asked. Brittany blinked, confused. Yes. Why? The agent checked her list. Purchase records show this device was bought on the Bennett Restoration corporate account 3 months ago. It is company property. She reached out and plucked the phone right out of Brittany's hand. Hey, give that back. That is my life, Brittany shrieked, jumping up. The agent simply dropped the phone into an evidence bag and sealed it. Not anymore, the agent said. It is a liquidated asset. Brittany stood there, her hands empty, her connection to the world severed. She looked at me with pure hatred. I hate you, she screamed. I hope you die alone. I looked at her calmly. I already died, Brittany. You girls killed me the day of the funeral. This is just the ghost coming back to haunt you. Suddenly we heard the roar of an engine from the garage. It was a high-pitched, aggressive revving sound. I knew that sound. It was the Porsche 911 GT3, Greg's pride and joy, the car he loved more than he loved Rachel. He is running. Miller shouted. I walked calmly to the front window. I did not run. I knew exactly what was going to happen. The garage door flew open. The silver Porsche shot out in reverse tires, screeching on the pavement. Greg was behind the wheel, his face twisted in panic. He was trying to back out onto the street, trying to thread the needle between the police cruisers. He thought he was fast. He thought he was clever. But he forgot who he was dealing with. I raised my hand and signaled the driver of the lead tow truck. The driver, a burly guy named Mike, dropped the hydraulic lift of his flatbed with a loud metallic clang. He dropped it right across the bottom of the driveway. Greg slammed on the brakes. The Porsche skid to a halt inches from the steel ramp. He shifted gears, trying to go forward, trying to drive across the lawn. But another deputy had already pulled his cruiser onto the grass, blocking the path. Greg was trapped. I walked out of the house and down the driveway. The rain had stopped and the sun was breaking through the clouds, shining on the sleek silver paint of the car. Greg was locking the doors. He was frantically rolling up the windows. He was shouting something that I couldn't hear through the glass. I walked up to the driver's side window. I tapped on the glass with my knuckle. Greg stared at me. He looked like a rat in a cage. Open it, I mouthed. He shook his head violently. Miller walked up behind me, his hand on his baton. Open the vehicle, sir. or we will break the glass. And I promise you fixing that window will come out of your pocket." Greg hesitated. He looked at the tow truck. He looked at the police. He looked at Rachel, who was standing on the porch crying. Slowly, defeatedly, he unlocked the door. He pushed it open and stepped out. He was wearing a tracksuit and holding a duffel bag. "I am leaving." Greg stammered, clutching the bag. "I am done with this family. I am done with her. I just want to leave." "You can leave," I said, "but the bag stays, and the car stays." "This is my car," Greg shouted, his voice cracking. "I bought this with my bonus." I looked at the clipboard Sarah had given me. "Actually, Greg," I said, "you leased this car under the company name for tax purposes. You put it down as a company vehicle, which means it belongs to Bennett Restoration, which means it belongs to the debt." I reached out and took the keys from his hand. He was too shocked to resist. I tossed the keys to the tow truck driver. "Load it up, Mike," I said. "Be careful with the transmission. It is worth about 200 grand. That pays for the interest on the loan for the last 4 months." Greg stood there on the sidewalk. He looked at his empty hands. He looked at the beautiful car being winched up onto the flatbed. He looked at the house that was now covered in orange seizure stickers. "What am I supposed to do?" Greg whispered. "How am I supposed to get to the airport?" I looked him up and down. I looked at his expensive sneakers. I pointed down the street. "It is a nice day for a walk, Greg," I said. He stared at me. "You are a monster," he spat. I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had felt in weeks. "No, Greg," I said. "I am just a carpenter, and I am finally cleaning up the mess." I turned my back on him and walked toward the house. I had one more room to inspect. I had to make sure they hadn't sold my wife's jewelry. As I walked up the steps, I heard the sound of footsteps running away down the pavement. Greg didn't even say goodbye to Rachel. He just ran. I looked at Rachel. She was watching him go, her face a mask of absolute betrayal. "He left you, Rachel," I said softly as I passed her, "just like you tried to leave me." She sank down onto the porch steps and buried her face in her hands. The house was mine again. The silence was returning. But this time it was the silence of justice, not the silence of loss. I walked into the kitchen and picked up my heart medication from the counter where it had been sitting for 3 days. I took a pill, swallowed it dry, and looked out the window at my truck. We were just getting started. The orange eviction sticker on the front door was bright enough to be seen from down the block. It was a neon mark of shame that signaled to the entire neighborhood that the Bennett empire, or at least the stolen version of it, had officially crumbled. I stood by my truck, watching the last of the sheriff's deputies drive away. The show was over, the flashing lights were gone, and all that was left on the sidewalk were 2 women and a pile of designer luggage that they could no longer afford to transport. The silence that followed the chaos was short-lived. It was broken by Brittany. She was sitting on one of her Louis Vuitton suitcases, shivering in the cool air, looking at her phone, which was no longer hers, remembering too late that it had been seized. She looked up at Rachel, her face twisted into a mask of pure venomous blame. "This is your fault," Brittany screamed, her voice cracking. "You told me this was a sure thing. You told me we would be millionaires. You told me I could quit my job at the boutique." Rachel was pacing back and forth, clutching her elbows. She looked like a ghost. Her hair was messy, her makeup was smeared, and she was staring at the spot where Greg's Porsche had been parked just 20 minutes ago. "Shut up, Brittany," Rachel snapped, though her voice lacked its usual bite. "Just shut up, I am trying to think." Think about what Brittany yelled, standing up and kicking the suitcase. "There is nothing to think about. We are homeless. We have no car. We have no money. And it is because you trusted that idiot Greg. You let him talk us into this. You let him convince us to kick Tom out." Rachel stopped pacing. She whipped around, her eyes blazing. "Don't you dare put this on me," she hissed. You were right there with us. You were the one spending $5,000 a week on clothes. You were the one mocking Tom on the internet. You got greedy, Brittany. We all did. I wanted to intervene to tell them that fighting on the sidewalk wouldn't bring the house back, but I stayed back. This was a necessary part of the demolition process. The structure of their entitlement had to collapse completely. Rachel pulled her phone out of her pocket. It was the only thing the deputies hadn't taken, probably because it was an older model. She hadn't bothered to upgrade on the company dime yet. Her hands were shaking so badly she dropped it twice before she managed to dial. I knew who she was calling. She put the phone to her ear, desperate hope clinging to her features. "Greg," she said into the phone, her voice sounding small and fragile. "Greg, where are you? Please, you have to come back. We can fix this. We can get a lawyer." I could not hear the other side of the conversation, but I could see Rachel's face. I saw the moment her heart broke. It wasn't a slow crack. It was a shatter. Her eyes went wide and her jaw dropped. "What do you mean?" she whispered. "What do you mean you are not coming back?" She listened for another moment, tears spilling over her eyelids. But we are getting married in a month," she sobbed. Then she pulled the phone away from her ear as if it had burned her. She stared at the screen, listening to the voice on the other end, screaming. "You are a fool, Rachel." I could hear Greg's voice now. He was shouting loud enough for me to hear it from 10 feet away. "You are a stupid, incompetent woman," Greg yelled through the tiny speaker. "You told me the old man was senile. You told me the company was clean. You didn't even check the books. You led me into a trap. Do you think I am going to stick around and pay off a $6 million debt for you? I am done." "But I love you," Rachel cried into the phone. "Love doesn't pay the bills." Greg laughed, a cruel, cold sound. "And by the way, do not bother looking for me. I am going to Vanessa's. She has a condo in Miami, and unlike you, she knows how to read a contract." The line went dead. Rachel stood there, the phone slipping from her fingers and clattering onto the pavement. She did not move to pick it up. She just stared at the empty street, the reality of her life crashing down on her. Her fiancé wasn't just a coward. He was a parasite who had jumped hosts the moment the food supply ran out. Brittany let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "Vanessa," Brittany said, shaking her head. "His ex-girlfriend. The one he told you was crazy." God, you are pathetic, Rachel. You lost everything for a guy who was cheating on you the whole time. Rachel looked at her sister. She looked at the house. Then she looked at me. I did not say I told you so. I didn't have to. The look in her eyes said she knew. She knew she had traded a father who loved her for a man who used her, and she had ended up with neither, while the sisters were tearing each other apart on the sidewalk. The legal machinery Sarah and I had set in motion was grinding away in the background. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Sarah. "Accounts frozen. Liquidation approved. The bank is ready to deal." I walked away from the sisters, stepping into the quiet of my truck cab to make the call. Because I was the primary creditor holding a secured debt that was larger than the value of the entire company, I had what the lawyers called a superior position. The bank didn't want to deal with a warehouse full of specialized German woodworking machinery. They didn't want to auction off clamps and saws one by one. They wanted the debt off their books. I spoke to the liquidation officer. He sounded tired. He knew that without me the assets were just scrap metal. "Mr. Bennett," the officer said, "we are authorized to accept your offer. You can repurchase the physical assets of Bennett Restoration, including all inventory and machinery for the liquidation value. We will deduct it from the judgment owed by the sisters." And the price I asked, knowing the answer. $300,000, he said. I smiled. I was buying my $6 million company back for pennies on the dollar. I was buying my own sweat and blood back at a discount. Do it, I said. Send the papers. I hung up the phone. I owned it all again. The saws, the wood, the client list, the legacy. It was all mine. The only thing I didn't own was the debt. That still belonged to Rachel and Brittany. They would be paying me for the rest of their lives. Every paycheck they ever earned would be garnished. Every tax refund seized. They would never escape the shadow of the mountain they had tried to drop on me. I stepped back out of the truck. The sky had turned a dark, ominous gray. The clouds that had been threatening all morning finally broke. It started with a few heavy drops slapping against the pavement like bullets. Then the heavens opened up. It was a torrential downpour, the kind that soaks you to the bone in seconds. Brittany squealed. "My hair!" she screamed. She grabbed her suitcase and started dragging it down the sidewalk. "I am not staying here. I am calling an Uber. I am going to Dad's old apartment." She didn't even look back at Rachel. She just ran her heels clicking on the wet pavement, fleeing the scene of their crime. Rachel did not run. She stood there in the middle of the sidewalk. She was wearing a silk blouse and expensive slacks, clothes meant for boardrooms and brunches, not for standing in a storm. The rain plastered her hair to her skull. Her mascara ran in dark Gothic streaks down her cheeks. She looked up at the house she had kicked me out of, the house she had tried to sell. The windows were dark now, staring back at her like empty eyes. She turned and looked at me. I was standing under the awning of the shop next door, dry and warm. I was wearing my old work coat. She looked at me with a desperate, pleading expression. She took a step toward me. She opened her mouth, and I knew what she was going to say. She was going to ask for help. She was going to say she was sorry. She was going to use the word Dad. I looked at her. I looked at the daughter I had raised for 20 years. I remembered teaching her to ride a bike. I remembered paying for her prom dress. But then I remembered the funeral. I remembered the locks being changed. I remembered the way she had looked at me across the conference table and told me to go feed the ducks. I did not step out into the rain to hold an umbrella over her. I did not offer her a ride. I simply turned around, got into my truck, and started the engine. Through the rain-slicked window, I saw her standing there, alone, shivering, broken. She was standing exactly where I had stood 4 days ago. The universe has a way of balancing the scales. It took everything from me to show me what I was worth, and it gave everything to her to show her what she wasn't. I put the truck in gear and drove away. The windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm, wiping away the image of Rachel standing in the rain, shrinking in the rearview mirror, until she was nothing but a blur in the gray distance. I wasn't looking back anymore. I was headed to the shop. I had work to do. The sound of a sharp blade slicing through cedar is the most honest sound in the world. It is a whisper, a long, rhythmic shushing noise that tells you the steel is true and the hand is steady. I was back at my workbench inside the main shop that I had officially repurchased from the bank that morning. The air smelled of sawdust and lemon oil. It smelled like peace. I was planing a rough beam, stripping away the gray, weathered exterior to reveal the warm red heartwood underneath. It was meditative work. It was exactly what I needed to cleanse my soul after the filth of the last week. I heard the door open behind me. I did not turn around. I knew who it was. The cadence of their footsteps was different now. It was not the confident clicking heel strike of the new owners. It was the shuffling, hesitant drag of people who had nowhere else to go. "Tom," a voice cracked. It was Rachel. I kept planing, "Shh." The shaving curled up from the wood like a ribbon of gold, falling softly to the concrete floor. "Dad, please," Brittany added. Her voice was thin, stripped of all its internet bravado. "We know you are in here. Please look at us." I pushed the plane forward again. "Shh." The sound was loud in the cavernous space. It was my answer. I had work to do. I had orders to fill. I had a business to run, and I did not have time for trespassers. We have nowhere to go. Tom, Rachel sobbed. The locks are changed on the house. Greg is gone. He took the operational accounts with him. We have $40 between us. We slept in a motel last night. A motel, Tom. It had bugs. Shh. Another curl of wood fell. I remembered the motel. I remembered the Walmart parking lot. I remembered the cold rain and the fear of not knowing if my heart would give out before I woke up. They were experiencing one night of discomfort. I had lived a lifetime of sacrifice to prevent them from ever knowing that feeling, and they had repaid me by throwing me into it head first. Mom wouldn't want this, Rachel cried, playing her ace card. She played it desperately, slapping it down on the table with trembling hands. If Mom were here, she would be sick. She would be horrified to see you treating us like this. We are her daughters, Tom. We are family. That stopped me. My hand froze on the handle of the plane. The blade rested against the wood. The silence that rushed back into the room was sudden and violent. They had brought Catherine into this. They had dared to speak for the woman whose memory they had insulted, whose wishes they had ignored, whose husband they had tried to destroy. I slowly turned around. They looked pathetic. That is the only word for it. Rachel's silk blouse was wrinkled and stained. Brittany was wearing sweatpants, her face devoid of makeup, looking like a child who had lost her balloon. They were standing in the doorway, the bright afternoon sun silhouetted behind them, casting long shadows into my shop. Shadows that I was done living in. I leaned back against the workbench, crossing my arms over my chest. I looked at them. Really looked at them for the first time in years, without the filter of a father's love blinding me. I didn't see my little girls. I saw two strangers. You are right, I said, my voice low and steady. Your mother would be horrified. Rachel let out a breath of relief, taking a step forward. Yes. Exactly. She would want us to be together. She would want you to help us. No, I cut her off. She would be horrified by you. Rachel stopped, her mouth hanging open. I picked up a rag and wiped the sawdust from my hands. I walked toward them, slow and deliberate. I raised you for 20 years, I said. I was the one who taught you to drive, Rachel. I was the one who paid for your braces, Brittany. I was the one who sat in the audience at every piano recital, every graduation, every failure, and every success. Your biological father wasn't there. I was. I paid for the weddings. I paid for the divorces. I paid for the mistakes. I am sorry, Dad. We are so sorry. Brittany wailed, tears streaming down her face. We messed up. We know we messed up. I shook my head. You didn't mess up, Brittany. You revealed yourselves. There is a difference. I stopped a few feet away from them. I could smell the desperation on them. It smelled like stale fear and cheap motel soap. For 4 days I continued. Just 4 days. That is all it took. The dirt wasn't even settled on your mother's grave before you turned on me. You didn't just ask me to leave. You erased me. You mocked me. You laughed at me while I was standing in the rain. You called me a senile old man. You called my life's work trash. But we were scared, Rachel pleaded. Greg told us, stop, I shouted. The sound echoed off the steel beams of the ceiling. Do not blame Greg. Greg was a thief, yes, but he was a stranger. You were my daughters. You were supposed to be the ones protecting me, but instead you held the door open while he robbed me. I looked at Rachel. Her eyes were swimming with tears, but I looked deeper. I looked for the regret. I looked for the love. And you know what the saddest part is? I asked softly. They stared at me, trembling. You are standing here crying, calling me Dad, begging for help. But I look in your eyes, and I don't see love. I don't see remorse, I see calculation. I took a step closer. You aren't crying because you hurt me, Rachel. You aren't crying because you dishonored your mother. You are crying because you lost. You are crying because the money is gone. You are crying because for the first time in your soft, sheltered lives, you are facing consequences. No, that is not true, Rachel stammered, reaching out a hand to touch my arm. I pulled back. It is true, I said, cold and final. If I wrote you a check right now for $5 million, you would dry those tears instantly. You would walk out that door, and I would never see you again. You don't want a father. You want an ATM. Well, the machine is out of order. Permanently. I walked past them to the large rolling door of the shop. I grabbed the chain hoist. Please, Tom, Rachel whispered, realizing what was happening. We have nowhere to go. You have your health, I said, pulling on the chain. You have your education, which I paid for, and you have the rest of your lives to figure it out. That is more than most people get. The metal door began to rattle down, blocking out the sunlight. Go get jobs, I said. Real jobs. Learn what it feels like to earn $1 instead of stealing it. It might be the only way you ever honor your mother's memory. Tom, please, Brittany screamed. I looked at them one last time. The door was waist high now. Goodbye, ladies, I said. I pulled the chain hard. The heavy steel door slammed into the concrete floor with a final thunderous crash. Boom! The light was gone. Their voices were cut off. I stood there in the sudden gloom of the shop, listening. I could hear them muffled through the metal crying, banging on the door for a minute. Then the sound of footsteps walking away. Then the sound of a car starting in the distance. Then silence. Absolute, beautiful silence. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of cedar and sawdust. My chest felt light. The heavy stone I had been carrying for weeks was gone. I wasn't an orphan. I wasn't a widower. I was a free man. I walked back to my workbench. I picked up the hand plane. I ran my fingers over the smooth, warm wood I had been working on. I placed the blade against the timber. Shh. The sound was perfect. I had a lot of work to do, and for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to doing it alone. 6 months have passed since the day I pulled the chain on that steel door. The workshop smells different now. For years, under the pressure to expand and modernize the air, was always thick with the smell of industrial solvents and the stress of meeting impossible deadlines. But today, the shop smells of fresh cedar shavings, beeswax, and patience. It is the smell of my youth, and it is the smell of my future. I am standing at the main workbench, but for the first time in 50 years, my hands are not the ones holding the chisel. I am watching a pair of younger, rougher hands guide the steel blade against a piece of white oak. The hands belong to Leo. He is 19 years old. He grew up in the foster system, bouncing from home to home, never owning anything that could not fit in a backpack. I found him washing dishes at the diner down the street, staring at the woodwork in the booths instead of his phone. He has no money. He has no connections. But he has the one thing Rachel and Brittany never had. He has hunger. Gently, Leo, I say, my voice low. Do not force the wood. If you fight the grain will always win. You have to listen to it. You have to ask it what it wants to be. Leo pauses. He takes a breath. He adjusts his grip. This time, when he pushes the chisel, a perfect paper-thin curl of wood rises up, spiraling like a ribbon. He looks up at me, his eyes wide with the thrill of creation. I did that, he whispers. You did, I say, patting him on the shoulder. And no one can ever take that away from you, because you made it with your own hands. That is the new motto of Bennett Restoration. After I bought the assets back from the bank, I made some changes. I took down the massive backlit sign that Greg had installed. I sold the fleet of leased trucks. I fired the marketing team that spent all day on Instagram. I stripped the company down to its bones. Now it is just me, Leo, and 2 old friends from the trade who came out of retirement because they missed the smell of sawdust. We are smaller. We make less money. But the work we do is pure. We don't build investments for yuppies anymore. We build heirlooms. I walked back to my office. The glass walls are still there, but Greg's modern art is gone. In its place, framed in a simple black border, hangs a single $100 bill. The bill Greg gave me for cab fare. It hangs there as a reminder that every man has a price, but mine was a lot higher than they thought. On the desk, sitting on top of a stack of blueprints, was a thick envelope from Sarah. It arrived this morning. I had been waiting to open it until the workday was done. I sat down in my old leather chair, the one that squeaks in just the right way. I used my letter opener to slit the top of the envelope. Inside was a final legal briefing and a personal note from Sarah. I pulled out the documents. They were court filings from the state of Nevada. Chapter 7. Bankruptcy. The names listed were Rachel Montgomery and Brittany Montgomery. They had to use their biological father's last name because I had legally revoked their right to use Bennett. I read through the summary. It was a complete collapse. After I seized the house and the cars, the mountain of credit card debt they had been hiding under the corporate umbrella came crashing down. They had nothing. The friends they tried to impress with champagne brunches had stopped returning their calls the moment the money ran out. Greg was gone, rumored to be hiding from his own debts in South America. But it was the last paragraph of Sarah's report that made me lean back in my chair. Rachel is currently employed at a diner in Reno, working double shifts as a waitress. Brittany has found employment at a call center handling customer complaints for an internet provider. They are living in a 2-bedroom apartment. They pay their own rent. They buy their own groceries. I put the paper down. I looked out the window at the skyline of Seattle. A lot of people have asked me if I feel guilty. My friends at the supply yard, even Sarah, sometimes they ask if I was too cruel. They ask how a father could watch his children fall so far so fast. They ask if I sleep well at night, knowing my stepdaughters are scrubbing tables and answering angry phone calls for minimum wage. I tell them the truth. I sleep better than I have in 20 years. Was I cruel? No. Cruelty would have been letting them continue the way they were. Cruelty would have been letting them live their entire lives thinking that they were entitled to the sweat of another man's brow. Cruelty would have been letting them become monsters who kick old men out into the rain. I did not destroy them. I saved them. Catherine, God rest her soul, loved them too much to teach them the hard lessons. She shielded them from the rain so they never learned how to build a shelter. I simply took away the umbrella. Now when Rachel picks up a tip from a table, she knows exactly what that dollar is worth. When Brittany pays her electric bill, she knows the hours of boredom she endured to keep the lights on. They are finally learning the lesson that I learned when I was Leo's age. They are learning that dignity is not found in a bank account or a designer bag. Dignity is the feeling you get when you go to bed tired because you worked for what you have. Maybe one day, years from now, they will understand. Maybe they won't. But that is no longer my burden to carry. I stood up and put on my coat. It was my old canvas work coat stained with oil and wood glue. It felt like armor. I walked out onto the shop floor. Leo was sweeping up the shavings, whistling a tune. He looked up and smiled. "See you tomorrow, Mr. Bennett," he said. "See you tomorrow, Leo," I replied. "Get some rest." We start on the mahogany table in the morning. I walked to the large rolling door. I pulled the chain, watching the sunlight spill across the concrete floor, chasing away the shadows. The rain had stopped weeks ago. The sky was a brilliant, piercing blue. I stepped out into the warmth of the afternoon sun. I took a deep breath of the cool air. I reached up and brushed a speck of sawdust off my sleeve. I didn't feel old. I didn't feel tired. I felt light. I walked toward my truck, the gravel crunching under my boots. I had a business to run. I had a legacy to build. And for the first time in my life, I was building it for the right people. I am Tom Bennett. I am a carpenter. and I am finally free. If there is one thing I want you to take away from my story, it is this. True wealth is not what you inherit, and it is not what you steal. True wealth is the unshakable knowledge that you can survive anything, because your strength comes from within, not from your possessions. Do not let anyone, not even family, make you feel like your value is a number on a spreadsheet. You are worth exactly what you are willing to work for, and no one can ever take that away from you unless you let them. Stand your ground. Protect your peace, and never ever sign your name to something that compromises your soul. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it gave you the strength to face your own battles. If you enjoyed this, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice and resilience. And tell me in the comments, do you think I was too hard on them, or did they get exactly what they deserved? I read every single comment. See you in the next story.